US aid to Ukraine has been suspended. The White House putting a pause on military assistance to the country until it says they feel that Kyiv is committed to finding a peace deal. US President Donald Trump once again criticised Ukraine's Volodymyr Zelensky, saying he should be more appreciative, but also suggested that minerals deal was still on the table. Vice President J.D. Vance said that if Ukraine wants security guarantees, the best way is to give Americans an economic upside in Ukraine.
I really don't care what President Zelensky says about me or anybody else, but he showed a clear unwillingness to engage in the peace process that President Trump has said is the policy of the American people and of their president. That's the real breakdown, is I think Zelensky wasn't yet there, and I think frankly now still isn't there, but I think he'll get there eventually. He has to. This is not going to make anybody happy. The Russians are going to have to give up stuff. The Ukrainians are going to have to give up stuff. You can't come to the Oval Office and say, give us security guarantees. We won't even engage with you about what we're willing to give up. That's been the Ukrainian posture. When that posture changes, as President Trump said, when they're willing to talk peace, I think President Trump will be the first person to pick up the phone.
Our international affairs commentator Douglas Herbert joins us on set now to take a closer look at it all. Douglas, firstly, maybe take us through exactly what has been halted. What is Ukraine not getting?
Well, first, let's look. As of January 20th, Trump's inauguration day, under the Biden administration, since the full-scale invasion by Russia of Ukraine 2022, you had about $66 billion in pure military aid delivered to Ukraine from the United States. In addition to that, and we don't talk about this as much, you had about $174 billion in financial and humanitarian aid, totally separate from military. A lot of that money was to pay things like teachers and doctors in Ukraine, essentially keep the government running. That was a big component as well. But we're talking here about military aid. There have been several categories of aid from the United States, but much of it considered really essential because the U.S. was able to supply types of weapons not available elsewhere coming from European countries. Up at the top of the list have been sort of the air defense systems. And the stars of that list have been the Patriot surface-to-missile air defense systems. There were about exactly three of them delivered from the United States to Ukraine. Obviously, for Zelensky, not enough. It's never quite enough. But they were extremely important in terms of giving Ukraine cover, some modicum of cover from constant Russian aerial bombardment. Also, you had these Stinger anti-air defense missiles, which were supplied by the United States as well. You had howitzers, you had mortars, heavy artillery, plus millions of rounds of ammunition to go with those howitzers, to go with those mortars. You had tanks, including the Abrams tank. You'll remember there had been a lot of debate over these heavy armored tanks for a while. They ultimately were delivered to Ukraine under the Biden administration. Helicopters as well. All of these essential components, and all of these now, at least temporarily, under Donald Trump's latest order, have been suspended. Now, there is estimates of about $1 billion of material which are on order or in the pipeline, which are immediately going to be affected by this suspension. I will note that the type of aid that was given to Ukraine from the United States came in two major distinct categories. One was called PDA, which is the Presidential Drawdown Authority. It's not new weapons from defense manufacturers. It's rather the drawdown of already existing Pentagon defense stocks in the U.S. So those are just a matter of shipping them out, taking them out of the warehouse. Then you had strategic assistance weapons, and that was literally weapons, new weapons, under contract with America's defense manufacturers, weapons made, delivered to Ukraine. Obviously, that takes time. It could take months, in some cases even years, to get those weapons produced and then shipped to Ukraine and then deployed on the battlefield. Those two forms of shipments, both right now, are affected, although it is unclear legally whether or not contracts that may have been signed with defense contractors can also simply be torn up and shredded under this new order, or whether some of them will still be honored. But what we do know is that the intention, at least as of now, is to temporarily suspend any form of military materiel going from the United States to Ukraine until, as Trump sees it, Zelensky is, quote, ready for peace.
So where does this leave Ukraine then in its defence efforts?
With, as I said earlier, with 1.5 hands tied behind its back. Does it leave Ukraine completely defenseless? No. But Zelensky has been clearer than anyone else in laying out what the implications are. He has said, if we cannot join NATO, and that is something that both Putin and Trump and Europe to a certain degree have taken off the wish list for now. If it can't join NATO, he says, we have to build NATO on our own territory. And what Zelensky has been doing is trying to put deeds behind those words in the form of ramping up Ukraine's own domestic missile manufacturing capacity, a lot of missiles, and also, namely, we talk about drones all the time. Drones have become sort of the new weapons of war. Low cost, technologically not always very hard to build. Russia's been using tons of them. Ukraine's been using ton. Ukraine has manufactured over 1 million drones by some estimates for this war. And these drones have been used often with quite devastating effect, mainly against Russia's infrastructure. To hit especially oil refineries. Oil refineries have been the backbone of Moscow's war effort. The revenues from oil and gas, to a lesser extent, have been used to fund Putin's war machine, his machine of aggression against Ukraine, have allowed him to continue pressing on full throttle with this war. So Ukraine has been using those drones in order to take aim at oil refineries. By some estimates, Russia's oil production capacity has been cut by about 10-15%. So that's what Ukraine is going to have to concentrate perhaps more and more on in the absence of the heavier war material that obviously you can't really wage an effective war without. The drones help, but they do not a battle against a Russian aggressor make.
Okay, Douglas, thanks indeed for that. Well, I'm going to bring in now a fellow in political science at the International Security at the University of Strathclyde, Dr Gavin Hall. Thanks for joining us. Can I start simply by asking you, this suspension in US military aid to Ukraine, what impact do you think that will have?
Well, good morning. It's probably not going to have that much impact immediately, but rather what it is going to impact is Ukraine's ability to be able to carry on the fighting and sort of continuing their own war effort. Obviously, the United States is a significant contributor to in terms of military aid to Ukraine, but as are the other European countries. So I think the latest figures put in direct military aid, the US somewhere around a total of $118 billion, using stats from the Kyiv Institute. If that's stopped and that's not going to come on, Ukraine wants to carry on fighting, then that shortfall has to be made up from somewhere else. One of the main areas where it could be significant is what is the US going to allow Ukraine to be able to use? So, for example, things like the Storm Shadow missile system that's provided by the UK and France to Ukraine is reliant on using American GPS to be able to hit its targets. Does this suspension to military aid include not allowing access to GPS and existing systems? Will the authorization to use American-made weaponry into Russia, will that be removed as well? Or is it simply going to be that these future orders that are in place to come in over the next, say, 6 months, are those going to be stopped and rowed back on if contracts and things allow?
It does sound like this suspension by the United States, and of course we have no idea how long it may last, but it is really giving the upper hand to Moscow in this war.
That's certainly an argument that can be made, but I think it's probably more in line with American President Trump's strategy, building on the White House meeting last week with Zelensky, where Trump said, "You don't have the cards." I think this is Trump saying to Zelensky, we've got the cards. If you want our assistance and help in bringing this war to an end, then you need to be dealing with us, not the European Union and Keir Starmer and the meeting that took place on Sunday. He's saying America's the main player and we're the people that you need to be engaging with if you want to actually end this conflict in a decisive way.
Indeed, and Donald Trump once again talking about those minerals that he wants to make a deal with Ukraine. He says that will make him interested enough to supply a security guarantee. But you mentioned Europe there, and indeed we saw a summit last Sunday. We're heading into another summit on Thursday, hearing from the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen saying that they are ready to make a massive surge in defence spending in the EU bloc. Do you see that happening, and what impact could that have?
Well, yes, I think the trend has been to increase defence spending ever since the 2014 Wales defence spending pledge. However, a surge in defence spending will potentially allow Europe to have certain capabilities in 3 years' time. It's not necessarily going to have a substantive impact now. But what it does do is shows a shift in a mindset. And if it's going to be the case whereby the United States is effectively more disengaged from Europe, increasing European capabilities is something that's going to be important going forward. Historically, this has always been not an American objective because effectively it has the potential to create a new superpower in terms of the European bloc. Which is seen to be contrary to American interests, though Europe really would have little choice in having to ensure its own security and stability in the event of further American withdrawal from the continent.
Finally, Dr. Hall, and briefly, you know, we're hearing from some French ministers saying that the rest of Europe hasn't been so close to war in many decades. Do you see a risk for the rest of Europe with this war in Ukraine and the way things are going?
It's hard to have a complete absolute statement on this, but Russia has been fairly surgical in its choice of targets and keen not to develop a situation whereby Article 5 of NATO is tested. For example, once the Baltic countries joined NATO in 2006, 2007, there have been no further attempts to influence what's going on there, because they don't want to challenge Article 5. If Article 5 is weakened, then the potential scope for challenge increases, though I don't think that's within President Putin's immediate plan or strategy. So we should be worried less about the direct threat to ourselves and more concerned with the overall implications for a weakened European security bloc.
Dr. Gavin Hall of the University of Strathclyde, thanks very much indeed for your time and insight.
Thank you.